Well, go ahead and grab a Bible if you got one handy and meet me in 1 Corinthians 13 today. 1 Corinthians 13 is where we're going to be this morning for week 2 in a 3-part series called What the World Needs Now. If you weren't here last week, I didn't spend a whole lot of time trying to convince us that the world has needs now. That's not the goal of this series. The goal of this series is to give us some focus when it comes to what the world's needs need. And to figure it out, we're looking at a 2,000-year-old letter to a church in the ancient world that is as relevant to us today as it was to them back in their day. I mean, if you read through the whole book of 1 Corinthians, you'll see a lot that's really familiar. A church that was planted to influence the world for good, who most of the time found the influence going in the other direction. Polarization, cancel culture, racial unrest, economic uncertainty, confusion and questions about sexuality, all of it is right there. And Paul writes this letter to clarify some things and to correct some things. But then towards the end of the book, he starts to cast some vision for what the church could be and should be toward a world like ours with needs. And I told you last week, the beauty of the vision is it worked. Some of the people that read this letter said, hey, what if we lived this way? And because they did, it turned a church, which turned a whole city, which turned an entire empire right side up from pretty far gone. Well, last week, Paul put his finger on some of the radioactive divisions in their world. And he challenged people who in a lot of ways had no business being together to show the world a picture that looks like a triune God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So that when the world tries to describe us, they struggle for how to do it, like we do with the Trinity. Like we're all so distinct and different. It's hard to talk about us as one, but we're so unified. It's hard to talk about us as distinct and different. Paul says, that's it. That's the kind of picture the world needs now. But if you're a thinking person, that picture raises some questions, doesn't it? I mean, it's a compelling picture. It's a nice vision, but is it really possible where the rubber hits the road? I mean, the differences Paul was talking about weren't just things like what kind of music you prefer or which sports teams you cheer for. And he's talking about issues with implications. What's the way forward in those as we discuss them with each other and as we navigate them in our world with our neighbors, with our families, on our various platforms, when it comes to issues that are real issues, even radioactive issues in the real world where you and I live? Well, last week, Paul gave us a picture. This week, he shows us a posture. And we've talked about this before, but it's been a few years. Your posture is your body's default resting position. It's the position your body naturally returns to when you're not really paying attention to it. Does that make sense? Okay, on the other hand, gestures are temporary movements that you make out of your posture in response to circumstances or opportunities or needs all around you. Well, why does that matter? I've got a neighbor down the street named Adrienne, Master Adrienne, actually, but she doesn't make me call her that. She's one of the coaches for the U.S. National Taekwondo team. Okay, she spends her whole life training people how to do literal conflict. But if you've ever done martial arts or something like that, you know a shockingly small amount of conflict training involves actual conflict. In fact, Adrienne told me one time the vast majority of her time, even with elite level athletes, is spent working on stances and positioning, posture. Why? Because if your posture is good, it opens up all the gestures you know, and it allows you to respond with circumstances with whatever they require in the moment. But if your posture is bad, it doesn't matter how quick you are. It doesn't matter how strong you are or how knowledgeable you are. If your posture is bad, you're stuck. You have limited ways to respond. And from there, you're either going to fall in disgrace or you're going to win with dishonor. Neither of those is acceptable outcomes in Taekwondo. Or, it turns out, in the Christ-centered life. What does it look like to live with the right posture in a world like ours? A posture that doesn't fall over because it's too aggressive all the time, and that doesn't fall over because it's too passive all the time, and isn't stuck because it's slouching all the time. Look at the first 3 words of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 8. Look what Paul says. He says, love never fails. Okay, let me tell you something about that word fails. Most of the time, when it shows up in ancient Greek literature and in the New Testament specifically, it means to fall in battle, to be overpowered or pushed over in a conflict. See, a lot of times we read 1 Corinthians 13 at weddings. But 1 Corinthians 13 is not just a commercial break to talk about weddings after Paul talks about how to be a church and how to survive and thrive in a radioactively divided world as radically different people. When Paul says love never fails, he's summarizing a posture that he says won't let you down in any conflict over any of the things that you face. He's saying if you work these things into your posture, what he's about to show us, you'll navigate conflict within the church, divisions in your neighborhood, debates on social media, in your marriage, in your sorority or your fraternity or your office culture too, in a way that will never, ever fail you in the long run. Doesn't mean you'll win every point every time. It means if you'll stand this way, you'll never fall where it matters. Okay, that is a huge promise. So, my neighbor, she's gracious. She doesn't make me call her Master Adrian when we're walking our dogs. You don't have to call me Master Chris from here. I mean, unless you want to. Here's what I want to do for us this morning. Okay, Taekwondo has 5 stances. Love has 15. Paul gives us 15 gestures that he invites us to practice into our posture so that as we maneuver as a body in the world, whatever the circumstance, whatever the issue, whatever the context, whatever the opportunity, this would be how we stand. And here's the thing, just like martial arts, the idea that you're going to be elite at all 15 of these this morning is not the way it works. You start where you are and you work on one move at a time. So that's what I want to encourage you to right from the very beginning. Pick 1 or 2 of these 15 that you feel like you're relatively competent at, and 1 or 2 that you want or maybe need to practice this week. And if you really want to get good at this, compare notes with somebody that you want to love well, a spouse, kids, with your parents, with a community group, with a running partner. Ask where they've seen these gestures show up in your life in a really good way, and tell them how they could help you improve in the area or 2 that you want to practice this week. Are you ready to see what they are? Well, if you go back, beginning in verse 4, Paul lists them. And you already might know this about the list. When you read it in our English translation, they all look like adjectives that describe what love looks like. Maybe how it feels. That's not how Paul wrote them. In Greek, all 15 of these things are verbs. Okay, Bob Goff was right. This isn't how love looks or how love feels. These are things love does. This is how love sets its feet as a diverse church in a divided world that would love to throw us off balance. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, beginning in verse 4. First thing that Paul says, love does. He says, love patiences. Love is patient. Notice, not passive, patient. This is a word that says we don't have to go the whole way today. I don't have to convince everyone of everything every time something comes up. And I'm not going to get out over my skis, but I'm not going passive. I can be patient with you, and I can be patient on you. Paul says love does that. It takes its time. He goes on. Love is kind, which is a word that means more than nice. It literally means to add value, to give benefit. In fact, the core root of this word is a word that means to be genuine to the core. And the combination of those things is powerful. Okay, this is the kind of person who adds value to your life, but in a totally genuine way. Not to get something out of you or to try to somehow manipulate you or sell you on something, but out of love for you. Okay, do people walk away from a conversation with you, even a disagreement with you, feeling like it took something out of them or added value to them? Paul says, I know what love does. The other thing It doesn't do, he says it doesn't envy. Okay, and envy is deeper than just jealousy. Jealousy means I want what they have. Envy says if I can't have what they have, I don't want them to have it either. That's envy. If I can't be happy, I'm going to make sure they're not happy. If I can't have nice things, I'm going to make sure they can't have nice things. If they have a position that I want or ought to have but don't have, I'm going to bring them down so that they don't have it either. Okay, big ways and small ways, that's what envy does. Keep reading. It doesn't boast. It is not proud. Those two words are both related. We talked about boasting before. It literally says love does not windbag. We talk about a person that blows smoke, somebody who's full of hot air. You know that person. The word for proud means someone who is overinflated. The kind of person who, in a movie about their life, would be the only person with a speaking role. You know, enough about me. Let's talk about what you think about me. A person that's totally convinced that their perspective is the only one worth considering. The only reason that you hold the position that you hold or think like you think is that you haven't listened to them long enough or paid attention enough to them. Constantly interrupting, rarely listening except to identify the next best place to take back over the conversation. You know people like that? That's those words. Paul goes on. He says, verse 5, love does not dishonor others. Love doesn't publicly shame another person. It doesn't publicly disgrace another person. It doesn't misrepresent a person's view or belittle their view or overgeneralize their view in order to paint it in the most sinister light. You don't accuse a person of being a racist, cop-hating, homophobic, communist, Nazi sympathizer just because they don't agree with you. Love doesn't deliver a zinger in the moment just because it came to mind in the moment. He goes on to say it's not self-seeking. Love's a posture that says, I'm not just in this relationship for what I can get out of it. I'm not just in it with you because of what you can do for me. I had this conversation this week with one of my black friends about why healthy relationships between black people and white people like ours are so hard to find. And he said, it's because they're so hard to start. Because so often we go into them thinking about something we're lacking or something that we're seeking for ourselves from someone who's different from us. And all of us can smell that coming in each other from a mile away. It's part of the reason that this posture and gesture thing is so important. Even when a relationship needs to start with a gesture that looks or feels like that, we've got to really quickly move back to a resting posture that is not self-seeking. Otherwise, it gets gross. Well, speaking of things that aren't gross, Paul goes on. He says, love is not easily angered. This is a cool word that literally means love doesn't go sour easily. It doesn't go sharp easily. Love refuses to let stuff rot in its heart. You ever had that happen in your refrigerator or your pantry? You know, you go out of town, you come back, and something stinks, and it infects everything. Even the stuff that's not rotten smells and tastes rotten. You know people like that? They just sat with something and stewed in something for so long that it comes to the surface in everything, almost without them trying. You know, you get close enough and it's like, whew, that sour, pungent anger thing comes through in a hurry. Paul says, don't let that be you. Love doesn't do that. It's not easily angered. He goes on to say it keeps no record of wrongs. This is a banking term. Love doesn't allow relationship bills to stack up and collect interest. Love doesn't get historical. It keeps short accounts, and it sends the rest to the shredder. It doesn't retread old arguments. It doesn't go searching for old data to make new points. It keeps no record of wrongs. Keep going, look at verse 6. He says, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. Paul uses this exact same idea earlier in the book when he talks about Moses in a conflict with the people of Israel who were wandering in the wilderness, complaining about not having water. And if you remember that story, you know Moses found a moral shortcut. He did the right thing, accomplished the right thing, but he did it the wrong way. He provided water out of anger. He struck the rock and did an old shepherd's trick instead of relying on God. And the people celebrated having water even though it came the wrong way. Do you remember what that cost Moses? Love doesn't rush to resolution even if it means getting there the wrong way. and it doesn't rejoice when something bad happens on the other side of an argument. And it doesn't excuse evil just because the person who did it agrees with us. That's a big deal in our world today. The church has to find the right posture. Paul goes on, verse 7, he says, love always protects. Literally, love always provides cover. I love this image. Think of your favorite war movie. I mean, you and I may have trouble together, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure there's a safe path back for you when you're ready to run back. I'm not burning all the bridges, and I'm not going to let you be a sitting duck for the enemy. I'm going to always provide cover for you to make it back. I love that image. He goes on and says, love always trusts. Love believes the best. I love how Andy Stanley talks about this. He says, this is the commitment, and it works in our marriages, or our workplaces, or our neighborhoods, or in our politics. It's the commitment that when what I expect is different from what I experience, when there's a gap there, I'm going to fill the gap with trust. I'm going to ask myself, why might a reasonable, rational, decent, good person do that, or think that, or believe that? And I'm going to assume that's the explanation until I can't assume that anymore. And then I'm going to go looking for the next best possible light with which to see another person. I'll always give the benefit of the doubt. It always trusts. That's what love does whenever it can. It goes on and says it always hopes. Love doesn't start with, they're never going to change. They're always going to be that way. Love takes a posture that says the relationship is always worth the investment because you never know what God will do. It always hopes. And finally, he says, love always perseveres. Love takes the posture that says they can walk away. They can ghost me. They can abandon the relationship. They can quit. I'm going to stay put. I'm going to keep this posture. I'm going to keep loving. Even though it feels like I'm losing in the short term, even though I'm exhausted, I'm not going to change my posture. I'm not going to stop doing these things. I'm going to take the long view because I believe the next few words. Remember them? Love never fails. Still with me? Okay, look at all 15 of them again. Paul says, if you want to move towards this world as people with radioactive differences who elevate your identity as people in the family of God and leverage your diversity and make honor your priority, this is how you have to set your feet. And it has to start with each other. These are the gestures you got to groove into habits so that habits slowly become posture. So that whatever circumstances or opportunities or conflicts or conversations or relationships you find yourself navigating through at any given time, you don't get caught out over your skis. You don't end up flat on your back. You don't end up stuck. You're in position with the right posture to be exactly who and exactly what the world needs now. And this is the point at which a whole bunch of us are saying, yeah, but they're not going to do any of this. I mean, I don't know if you noticed it, Freeland. This is not the posture the liberals take. This is not the way the far right stands to fight. Hollywood's not going to do this. Mainstream media, they're not going to do this. My goofy neighbor's not going to do this. People in my community group, they're not going to do this. Heck, my husband's not going to do this. This would be a great way to stand if we're talking about love taekwondo, where we just stand and pose and practice for ourselves in front of a mirror most of the time. But the real world ain't like that. We're in the fight of our lives, for our families, or our culture, for our world. And if they're going to fight dirty, we better be ready to fight dirty too. It isn't our only hope of surviving in a dog-eat-dog world to fight fire with fire. Not according to Jesus. Not just his words or his teachings, not just advice that he gives. Notice, this is the way Jesus lived life. This is the way he dealt with the world around him, the way he's dealt with you and me. I mean, can you imagine if Jesus had come to the earth and somewhere along the way just said, Father, I'm in the fight of my life here, and they're on a mission to destroy me, to destroy our mission to bring life and flourishing and hope and peace and joy to the earth through me. Like they're trying to thwart it and silence it and stop it from advancing at every turn. Father, I'm out. What if Jesus had gone passive? Hey, Pharisees, tax collectors, sinners, centurions, Peter, James, John, peace out, fellas. Like, I'm going back to heaven where I can be around people that agree with me all the time. People aren't constantly trying to bait me and destroy me and trap me and silence me. Like, good luck with your dead and trespasses and sins things. I'm just going to lean away and go away and stay away from the world and people like you. You guys have at it. Believe what you want. Behave how you want. You do you. Where would we be? What if he'd gone aggressive? Father, I've had it. No more patience. No more listening to this idiot fisherman who just keep asking ridiculous questions and don't understand obvious answers. Destroy them, Father. Like, no more kindness. I'm done adding value to the lives of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the people who just want to score points in arguments. Let's call in their accounts. Let's tell the world their secrets, all the careless thoughts and words and actions. Let's write them in the sky. No more grace, no more hope. They're never going to change. They're not worth the pain. Let's go scorched earth on the whole thing, literally. Jesus took a different posture. He took this posture. Read through the Gospels. He was so patient, even with the Pharisees, wasn't he? I mean, yes, he gestured out of that. He called out their hypocrisy. But for 3.5 years, he kept inviting them and answering their questions. People in the world with radically different views from him, socially and sexually, they kept inviting him to dinner because of the value he added to their life, and on and on. This is the way Jesus loved, and it's still the way he loves us today, isn't it? Well, yeah, but they killed Jesus. You know, if I do what Jesus did, I'll end up dead like Jesus did. It's true on Friday. Friday afternoon, he looked awfully weak. Saturday morning, afternoon, Saturday evening, it looked like love personified had lost the battle. The worst thing in the world happened to the best possible person. But Sunday morning, and for every single day ever since, the first part of verse 8 has been proven to be true. Love never fails. And in fact, the beauty of that story is that because of what Jesus did, you can be fully and completely forgiven. Have hope for the future, a fresh start, a brand new identity. As a gift, he gave everything to pay for. And the beauty of that promise is, now that we're no longer his enemies, he brings his strength and his ability and his power, his promise, his life to work on our behalf. You're not on your own when it comes to anything on this list. I mean, you can't do this, any of it. It's supernatural. That's the point. Only the Jesus who's risen from the dead and alive in you can do this, in you and through you. But he wants to, for your sake, for the sake of your marriage, for the sake of your family and your sorority and fraternity and neighborhood and workplace, for the sake of our city and our nation and our world, because radioactively different people who stand together and who can stand in the world like this is what the world needs now. I told you earlier, it works. This letter went to the church in Corinth, and a few of them decided to live like this towards each other and towards their world. And then a few more. And it turned the church and then the city and a whole empire right side up from pretty far gone. To the point, listen to this, about 100 years later, during the lifetimes of the Corinthians' children and grandchildren, enough of them were living this way that the world took notice of them. They saw people from radically different worldviews and perspectives and cultures united as one body, and they couldn't figure it out. And a guy named Tertullian wrote an op-ed for the Carthage Times that said, here's what you're seeing, world. Pay attention to what it is. Look what his words were. He said, it is mainly the deeds of a love so noble that lead many to put a brand upon us. See how they love one another, they say, for they themselves are animated by mutual hatred. How they are ready even to die for one another, they say, for they themselves will sooner put to death. And I love that. It's even such a 21st century image. This is our brand. This is our mark. This is what we're known for, what we're known by. When people go, that's so on brand for the Christians. It was this, how we love each other. It stands out among all of the other brands of mutual hatred in the world. Tertullian says, that's how we're choosing to live, in a dog-eat-dog kind of world. And at the end of the day, Roman culture and customs, they didn't endure, collapsed on itself. But 2,000 years later, still, love hasn't failed. Would you bow your head with me? You know, some of you have a hard time even getting categories for this because you realize you've never been loved like this. You don't know what it looks like. And there may be a lot of reasons for that you'd point to, whether right or wrong. But here's the good news. That narrative, never been loved like that, can change today. Because Jesus Christ has done all of this perfectly, and He's directed it all towards you. Patient, kind, sacrificial. He paid for everything you've done, no record of wrongs, and provided the cover you need to come home. And you can do that right where you're sitting today. Tell Him, Jesus, I'm trusting in You, Your payment for me, Your life within me, and that You'll accept me if I ask. So I'm asking. Lord, the rest of us, we recognize we've got a long way to go before this is our brand in this world. And yet I pray, Lord, for every single one of us, as individuals, that we would begin to perfect this posture, that this would be the way we stand together, and this would be the way that we stand towards the world, that we would be patient and kind, that we wouldn't envy, we wouldn't be windbags, that we wouldn't keep records of wrongs, but that we would stand with a firm, confident posture that love never fails. And so we don't have to get out over our skis, we don't have to go passive, we don't have to be stuck with limited ability to respond to the world. We can love the way that You've loved us, the way that You want to love through us. Would You let us yield to You and love like that in the world that desperately needs it now? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.